Okay, I will say hello and welcome back to another episode of All About Balance. And today I am joined by somebody that needs absolutely no introduction whatsoever. Arguably one of the most, if not the most decorated and successful people I'll probably ever have on this podcast. But today I am joined by none other than Rosi Sexton. Rosie, how are you doing?
Hi Harry, how are you doing? It's good to be talking to you.
Thank you, likewise. I don't know if you remember actually, but I've actually spoken to you once before. We had a very brief hour where you gave me some really brilliant back pain advice. Do you remember?
Yes. Now you mention it. Yes, I do remember. It's I speak to obviously quite a lot of people in my life.
Yeah, of course.
Sometimes I have that out of context moment when I try and identify where I've seen somebody before. But I'm glad it was helpful for you.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously there's been a bit of a forced layoff, but that was a good, I'd say a good year and a half ago, maybe, that we had that conversation. And I came and I said the basic things of I invert too much and I do too much jiu-jitsu and not enough weight training. And you were like, okay, don't do that and do this instead. Like, all right, fabulous. But maybe let's start there, because there's so many things that we could probably talk about. But talk to me about osteopathy and why osteopathy and how you got there.
So I think the thing that inspired me to get into osteopathy, as with a lot of us, I think, was some back pain that I had myself.
Sure.
It was as a result of a judo injury. I'd been thrown and landed awkwardly, and I was in pain for, I mean, it felt like it was months. It might have been weeks, but it felt like it went on forever. And it just wouldn't go away, and I couldn't get comfortable, and sitting was painful, and standing was painful, and lying down was painful, and doing anything was painful. And I couldn't train, and it was driving me mad. And then eventually my judo coach said, you need to go and see this guy. And he gave me the number for his osteopath.
Okay.
And first I'd had to do with osteopathy. I didn't really know what it was about or anything like that. And he sort of had a look at me, sort of got me to do a few movements, and then he put his finger on it and went, that's where the problem is. And he did a few things, and he said, right, it's going to be a bit sore for a day or two, and then it'll start to settle down, and just keep doing these movements and stretching, and it'll be fine. And it just felt like magic.
Yeah.
It was one of the where I'm not sure what that is or how you're doing it, but I need to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And I mean, at the time, I was just finishing up my PhD, I think. So it was like, oh, well, I'm not going to, start all over again and do something new. But then a few years later, sort of circumstances had changed, and I mean, initially, I'd actually done a sports therapy course.
Okay.
Because I mean, obviously, in mixed martial arts, you experience a fair few injuries. You know, even the sort of fairly minor sprains and strains.
Yeah.
And a lot of my teammates had injuries and things like that. And it got to the point where, I'd started doing a bit of reading and trying to figure out, well, how can we manage these? Because a lot of the time you'll go and see somebody and they won't be able to give you good advice for getting back to your sport. It'll be, well, this is, good advice if you want to sit at a desk or go to the but I don't know how to get you back to doing jiu-jitsu. So I was sort of starting to do quite a lot of reading and thinking about that sort of thing myself. And it went from there to doing a sports therapy course. And then eventually I just realised, you know what, I want to do this properly. Mm-hmm. I bit the bullet. It was a 5-year part-time university course.
Jesus.
And I went back and did that. I was, the course was in Oxford and I was living in Manchester at the time. So I spent entirely too much time on the M6.
Oh God, gross.
But actually it was the best thing I've done because I love the job. It's, I think at the time, when I started out, I suppose I wouldn't have imagined being where I am now. And it's kind of just grown from one thing to another. I mean, I looked at, it was a funny thing. I had a moment where I looked at my filing cabinet the other day and saw sort of, records of all the people I treated. And I went, my God, this is, you know, I've got all of these people relying on me to, you know, and it's a good feeling, you know. I think being able to help people, being able to get people back to doing the things that are important to them, is something that for me is a real passion. And I think it's something that is neglected in a lot of other areas. I mean, I think, again, you know, you go to see a doctor, and I mean, I think GPs are massively underrated. They do a huge amount of, they've got so many things to cover. But I think in terms of the tools they've got in their toolbox and the system that they work within, it's very hard for them to focus on how to get, you know, that one person back to doing the sport or the thing or the activity that's really crucial to them. And I mean, I get people sort of from all kinds of different walks of life. I mean, I think one of the most rewarding ones was the chap who came in and said, I just want to be able to play with my grandkids in the park.
Oh yeah, of course. Jesus, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I mean, my back hurts and I feel like I'm getting old and I can't do that anymore, and it's making me really sad. And yeah, and I think we got him back to the point where he was able to do that, and he was able to move around, and it made a huge difference to his life. Or, you know, the person who just wants to be able to dig the garden, or, you know, do the you know, or I mean, I especially at the moment in the current economic climate, you know, I see a lot of manual workers as well, and people say, look, my back hurts and I can't take time off because who's going to pay the bills?
Yeah.
And that, so I think, you know, looking at that bigger perspective and why being able to do certain things and why movement is important to people, rather than just saying, oh, you should stop doing that or take 3 months off and have a rest. I think that's the thing that sort of, I think, sets me apart from a lot of other professionals that people might go to see.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that it's such an interesting juxtaposition of you're being treated by someone who's needed to be treated previously for a variety of different things, right? You're engaging with people, even just a layman, not even a combat sports person, like a practitioner, whatever you want to call it. Like you're dealing with people that may well have problems that range from severe injuries from judo throws, or, you know, compressed spines from jiu-jitsu, or whatever it is from MMA, to then just a gentleman that wants to play with his grandchildren, or somebody even more, like arguably even more severe, just somebody that wants to do their job, you know. And I think that that's something that's really unique about the service that you offer. Is it's not just somebody that's been to uni, it's somebody that's literally lived through a variety of injuries and isn't trying to restrict what you're doing. It's essentially the opposite, right? And I think that's something that's really, really unique, and probably one of the reasons why you look at your filing cabinet and you're like, oh my Lord, like there's so many people in this thing.
I think, yeah, I mean, I always said personal experience is really important. And I mean, just on a basic level, I think it's much easier to be able to empathise with the people who come into clinic.
100%.
You've experienced that yourself. And, you know, sometimes I'll tell people sort of the story of my neck injury, for example. And, you know, people come in and they're worried about they've had an MRI scan and they're worried about some of the things it says. And it's like, oh, will I ever get back to normal? And I think being able to say, you know, I've been in that situation. I know what it feels like, and you know, and here I am now, you know, some years down the line, and I think we can do the same thing with you. I think that makes a huge difference. And I mean, one of the things that people sort of tell me when they've maybe been to, or they've seen somebody who's perhaps just a little bit less experienced, you know, someone who's sort of fresh out of university, and potentially, you know, they understand, you know, they've got the book learning, but they don't necessarily have the experience of what that feels like. You know, what does back pain really feel like? You know, why does you know, when people come in and they say things like, you know, I just can't get comfortable and it's driving me mad, and I think until you've been there, the tendency is to think, well, yeah, it can't be that bad. It's just a bit of back pain.
Yeah.
And I mean, I had an HR manager who I was treating at one point, and she'd had a really nasty back injury. She was in all kinds of pain. And one of the things she said to me was, I feel really bad because my entire life, you know, when I've been talking to people who've got back pain who can't come into the office because I've got back pain, there's always the bit of me that's been thinking, oh, it's only back pain. You know, surely you can just, you know,
muddle through it.
It's, yeah. But now I understand what it's like. And, you know, even though she'd never said that to people, just the fact that she'd not got it in that way, you know, I wish I could go back and, you know, I'd deal with those cases differently. And I think that's really true. You know, I think it's.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's really striking about the way that you speak about this stuff is the thing that you touched on before about now being in a position where you want to help others, right? And that's essentially a different life from the life that you're taught about how you're supposed to be an MMA fighter or how you're supposed to be an academic or whatever. It's entirely a process that you have to focus on yourself and your own goals, right? Has it always been like that, or was there a switch?
I think there has been a switch. I think it's one of those things. There are different. You go through different stages in life.
Yeah.
Everyone has different phases, and I think that's important because, you know, we get, you know, maybe if we're lucky, 80 years on this planet.
Yeah.
And in that time, we've got time to do a lot of different things.
Clearly.
Can't necessarily do them all at once.
Yeah.
And I mean, for the time that I was, you know, being a mixed martial arts fighter, it's in many ways a very self-indulgent sort of lifestyle. You know, I think you have to focus on yourself. You have to focus on how can I be the best I can be. You know, how am I, you know, getting enough sleep, making sure I'm eating the right things, doing my training at the right times. And, you know, if you've got a fight coming up or an important grappling competition or something like that, it's, you know, say you've got to prioritize those training sessions. And sometimes that's a question of maybe not being at that family get together, or, you know, not prioritizing some of the other things that you could be prioritizing.
Yeah.
And I think if you want to do something like that at that level, that is to a certain extent inevitable.
Of course, yeah, of course.
And there's a value to that, because I think you can learn a lot from doing that. And that pursuit of excellence is something that gives you a perspective on one sort of how I work, you know, how my brain and body work, and how you know, what gets me motivated, what gets me excited about things, how I perform well, what I need to do to get myself into a position where I can perform well, you know, how I learn most quickly, you know, how I can get from not being able to do something to being able to do it in the space of a few weeks. So there's lots of things that I learned from that process. And what that's meant is that I'm now in a situation where I can use those skills to help other people. So, but I wouldn't be there had I not gone through that in the first place. So I think it's one of those that, you know, it's almost a journey that you have to go on. You know, I think you don't start out by saying, you know, I mean, well, some people do, and I mean, obviously that's very that's great. When you go out and you say, right, I just want to dedicate myself to helping other people, and that's fantastic. But that's not how I came at it. You know, it was very much a question of, right, I want to see how well I can perform. And then out the other side of that, you sort of realize that actually there's a bigger picture here. And the things that are important, and maybe not the wins and the trophies and the you know, your fight record. It's actually, you know, the position those skills put you in, and how you can use that to make the world around you a better place, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that the pursuit of excellence is necessary to the human condition for things like transitioning between life stages and for that experience that you have such a wealth of?
I'm always reluctant to say that there's only one way to do something. You know, there's, you know, this is, you've got to do it this way, because I think lots of people out there have different experiences and they have constructed their life in a different way. All I can say is that this is what's worked for me, and I think, you know, it's something that's worked for other people as well. It's something that a lot of people can relate to, or seem to be able to relate to. But I certainly wouldn't, you know, discount, you know, other approaches to things.
Sure.
But I think for me, it's something that I was always very focused on. When I was younger, it was about, I was very competitive, you know, it's about being the best I can be, and you know, I want to be at the top, you know, I want to be able to, you know, perform on that big stage. And that was always a real focus with whatever I was doing. I mean, I started off in academia, you know, maths was something that that was my subject at university, first time round. And yeah, I mean, I remember being at school and being, I mean, younger than my son is now, and sort of feeling like I want to be the best at this. So I've always had that sort of drive to, you know, and it was only maybe when I was coming towards the end of my mixed martial arts career, and you know, during the time I spent training as an osteopath and all of those things, that I suppose that focus started to shift, and sort of recognizing that actually maybe there's more to life than, you know, maybe the really important things but I think that's something that's a realization that I had to come to through the process. It's not something that anyone could have told me. If I could go back and you know, talk to my 16-year-old self, I don't think that's something that I would have appreciated at that point, and that's fine, because as I say, I think we have those different stages and you have to go through them.
Where does that motivation come from? Where does that competitive nature come from, do you think?
Oh, I mean, there's a really good question. I think to some extent that's always been how I've been. I mean, I remember, I mean, even from being a tiny kid, you know, I'd always wanted to achieve, and you know, wanted to win. It's wanted to be the best. And I suppose you get into sort of analysing, you know, what is it that made me that way? You know, is it because you know, that was the thing that I did, you know, I'd get positive attention for, you know, and you know, whether it was that or whether it was, I don't know. I always found that sort of competition made me come alive. It was that sort of added pressure that you feel like, okay, game on. And I mean, I still get that, but just it's in a different context, you know.
Because I was going to say, it doesn't feel like you're without that competitive streak. It doesn't feel like you're without the pursuit of excellence, because, you know, you looked at your filing cabinet and you're still like, oh, Jesus, that's quite full, right? And it's not like you're putting your hands up and being like, oh, I'm helping people now, I'm not trying to be the best osteopath I can be, because that's obviously as far from the truth as you can get. But you know, it seems that when somebody is a winner, right, like a high level winner irrespective of what field that is in, whether it's in an academic field, a sports field, sort of a, what brand would you even put under osteopathy? I guess it is medical in some fashion.
Healthcare,
healthcare. Like whether it be in that field, that doesn't leave you, right? And even when you just were speaking about, oh, I thrive under competition and it's game time, there's a wry smile that comes across your face, right? That it's like, yeah, it's still there. Like that thing is still there.
I mean, I think it's a question of how you measure success. And
sure,
I think
that's a great
the criteria for success have become broader. So it's, you know, it's not so much winning the fight or you know, being a world champion or that, you know, when I get that patient back to playing in the park with his grandchildren, I mean, for me, that feels like a, you know, that's a win. You know, that's comparable to any winning any competition. You know, I think when you go away and you think, yeah, I mean, that person was in pain, and because of them, they're back out there living their life and doing the things that matter to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, you know, I mean, that's success. You know, that's all about being the best I can be, and you know, being the best osteopath. But I suppose what I'm looking at is it's not so much about competing with other people. It's about saying, right, how do we do what we set out to do? You know, when that person comes in and they've got, I mean, I suppose there's, you know, to use an equivalent that I find myself dealing with these days, it's when somebody comes in and they say, I've been to everyone.
Oh yeah, of course. I bet you hear that all
been
the
to everyone
time.
And it's not worked. I'm still in pain, and I've just come, you know, somebody said I should come to you, and it's sort of, you know, they're right at the end of the rope, and that's when I kind of go, okay, all right. And I mean, again, you know, sometimes things are beyond your control. You know, I think it's always important to say, you know, with anything like that, you can't help everyone. You can't solve everything. But I think there's a remarkable amount of the time, actually, with the right approach, when you find the right approach for the right person, it turns out that you can help people. And I think being able to sort of think outside the box, think, right, well, what haven't we looked at? You know, what's not been focused on here? And again, you know, those are some of the cases that you know, that I found exciting. Yeah? I mean, I had someone came to see me, and is quite a sort of former professional athlete, former professional sports person, and you know, they had a problem that they'd been to see sort of lots of professionals about, podiatrists and everything, and they'd had scans and they'd had diagnoses, and nothing had really helped. And they came in and we had a look at it and went, okay, let's try this. And it turned out that it worked really well. And that was one of those moments when you go, okay. It's so yeah, I mean, to me, that's what success looks like these days, and that's what keeps me motivated. You know, those are the moments where you go, yeah, you know, I'm achieving something here.
Yeah, because there's sort of, without, I don't want to brand it as competition because it kind of feels a bit gross, but there's almost competitive lines in that you find the problem to be a challenge, and then
yeah,
outside of that, it's okay. Well, when somebody comes to you and says, oh, well, I've seen everyone, right? And obviously that's a little bit hyperbolic, but you know, they've seen more than enough people for them to have got to their wit's end. They turn up at your door at the combat sports clinic and they say, look, help me. You know what I mean? And that's obviously a challenge because it galvanizes you to be like, okay, I'm the final stop here. This is the last chance, blah, blah, blah. It's very similar to any competition scenario.
Yeah.
It feels like a final, right? It's a final of whatever it is. And yeah, I can see it ultimately that it just kicks in, and that's where it is. And I feel that there's parallels to everything, whether it be, you know, whether it be turning your hand to being a high level academic, or whether it be a maths competition, or whether it be running for election in the political sphere. Like there's parallels in the way that you've said things, the way you contextualize things, the way that you bring analogies to things. It seems that there's parallels to learning and being successful in any sport, in any field. And I know that you've talked about this before, about the art of learning, and once you've learned one thing to a high degree, you can almost learn anything. But I feel that that's extremely true, at least for my own experience. You know, the way my job, I work in tech, and it feels to me like once you've learned how to fix one problem, you can essentially fix anything. And that then extrapolates out to again, almost any sphere and anything. It's just different words and different contexts, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's transferable skills.
Yes, absolutely.
There are transferable skills in all kinds of unexpected areas. I mean, we'll get on to talking about politics, I'm sure, in a minute.
Yeah, I'd love to.
I think one of the things that I found, I wrote a Twitter thread about this, which was quite popular, but transferable skills from mixed martial arts to politics.
Sure. Sure.
You know, politics is a combat sport. It's
definitely is.
You know, just different context, but there's a lot of crossovers. And I think the more different things you do, and the more different things you do to a reasonably high level, the more you get to see those parallels, and you say, okay, I've seen something that looks a bit like this before. I wonder if I can use some of the things that I learned there in this situation. And again, it's, you know, the more things you do, the more different crossovers you've got. And you can, linking between maths and osteopathy and combat sports and politics and things like that, you can, pick out those different areas. So it's the opposite of being a specialist, I suppose. It's being a generalist.
See, I'm not sure I agree with that, because to get to a high level in anything, you have to be a specialist. So I think, and I'm not sure I necessarily agree with the idea of generalism, because I feel like in a lot of ways people, and again, this is me speaking of my own experience, like if I have a general interest in something, the likelihood is I'm going to go down the rabbit hole and I'm going to go all the way until I
yeah. Right? I mean, I always say to people that I have a short attention span. I'll do one thing for about a decade, and
yeah, I understand that. Yeah,
and then I go on to something else. But I think this is misunderstood, because people talk about. I think of myself as a generalist. I mean, I've done a number of things to a reasonably high level. I'm not truly world class at any of them, but I'm not bad. I'm not bad. And I think, that, like I said, there are people who devote their entire lives to playing chess, and that's all they do. They just play chess, and they're brilliant at chess. And somebody who doesn't devote their entire life to it is maybe never going to quite achieve that same level. But actually, you can get pretty damn good. And if you get pretty damn good at a number of different things, to me, that's what being a generalist is. It doesn't mean that you dabble in things. It doesn't mean, I did 4 weeks of Spanish and, 4 weeks. Sure. It's, it's, this is the phrase, jack of all trades and master of none. And again, the thing is, when people are talking about that, the context that's missing. I mean, again, I think if you look at the full quote, there's a bit of a different perspective. So I'll leave that as a bit of homework for your listeners.
Sure.
But when you talk about being a jack of a particular trade, that's not somebody. That's not a raw apprentice. That's somebody who's done it to a pretty good level. But by being able to do that across a number of different fields, I think you can sometimes see those links in a way that isn't always obvious to people who've only ever been in that one silo.
So this is why I can't agree with your own determination of being a generalist, because to get to that level in so many different things means you're a specialist in learning, in my opinion, right? Like I can't agree that you could be a general, and I actually don't agree. Like if you're a specialist in chess, right, let's use your example.
Yeah.
And you go down the rabbit hole for 35 years and you don't have an attention span like we do. I mean, a decade is still pretty impressive for a small attention span, let's be honest. But if you go down the rabbit hole and you dedicate your life to chess, I can almost guarantee that if in those final 10, 15 years left, when you're just sick of the board, you could turn your hand to almost anything, because the comparisons and the parallels that you've seen, that you've already highlighted, right, that you will see it in some fashion. If you're amazing at chess, you could probably do maths. If you're amazing at maths, you could probably build a house. You know, like there's
to some extent that's true. I mean, as I say, I think there are transferable skills. There are also some areas where it doesn't transfer, where you think it might do.
Sure.
There are some things. I mean, as I say, there are things. There are lots of things that I'm terrible at. And again, you know, because whether there's a specific part of that puzzle that's missing, and it's not something that I've ever really focused on. So
that's it, though. It's that you're not focused on it. It's not that you're. Sorry.
Yeah. So I think some things transfer, and some things they transfer in weird ways, and sometimes they work better than others. But yeah, I mean, as I said, you know, there's sort of going into politics from a mixed martial arts background. I think that gives me. I mean, I've had people tell me that I'm a relatively inexperienced politician, which is true. It's absolutely true. And I acknowledge that. But what I do have is a completely different set of experiences from most people who end up in politics.
I mean,
and I think that in itself is a useful thing.
I think before we actually, we'll get onto that. I think I'll probably filter it in a different time. Like on that, like, what does that even mean? That statement of you're an inexperienced politician. What does it even mean to be an experienced politician?
I think having a lot of experience of politics and of the political system and how the political system works and how to make it work. I mean, again, that is a skill set in itself. And that's, I mean, it's like navigating any system. You know, I think the more time you spend in that system, the better you understand how to navigate it effectively. And that's something I've certainly been learning a lot. I mean, I've had a very steep learning curve over the last few years, and sort of trying to figure out how do you get things done.
Sure.
You know, when somebody comes to you with a problem, again, you know, going back to the osteopathy parallel, you know, what are the tools you've got in order to address that problem? What are the tools you've got in order to get something done about it? And that's something, I mean, to some extent, some of that's going to be specific to the context, it's specific to that political context. And it's about sort of getting familiar with that and learning the ins and outs of it. So that's important. And I'm not going to discount the relevance there. But at the same time, I think there's also the, you know, what you bring to it from outside, which is more those transferable skills and attributes. And as I say, my transferable skills and attributes are maybe a bit different from your average politician.
Sure. I mean, I don't think there's much about you that's average, to be honest. But I think you make a good point. Although my only criticism of that sort of viewpoint or ideology, I guess, of being this, you know, you're inexperienced politician. I mean, if we look at what politics is, in my opinion, it's a set of minds to determine the best tools for governance, right? Well, in order for you to be the best politician, probably the least important skill that you should have as a politician is knowing how the political system works. Instead, it should be a vast understanding of what systems outside of the political system work, right?
I think, yeah, and that's really important, because I think experience is not in and of itself a good thing necessarily. I mean, I think it's useful to understand how the current system does work, because if you want to change things, you have to work within the current system to make that happen. But at the same time, I think if you get too institutionalized within that system, you sometimes don't see possibilities outside of it, that maybe a fresh set of eyes coming to something, you say, well, why are we doing it this way? You know, surely it would make much more sense to do it like that. But once you've been in there for that long, you stop seeing it. You stop seeing the ways in which it doesn't make sense, because it becomes normal to you.
Yeah, it's habitual, right?
So I think actually, you know, there's a value to coming to something with a fresh set of eyes. So there's a balance between having that understanding of how things work and why they are the way they are, but also being able to see alternatives, and not being too deeply embedded in that one system.
I imagine that you cause so many fucking problems. So many problems for these people.
Yeah, you wouldn't believe.
I wouldn't believe. I mean, I would believe, but I can't imagine. I can just, oh, Jesus. I imagine you sitting in front of a room with these dudes in, you know, average suits that have been doing this for 40 years. And this, you know, this lady from Solihull walks in and was like, all right, lads, this is how we're going to do it. And
well, I'm our group spokesperson for health and adult social care. So, I mean, obviously there's a parallel with my day job, but it's also meant learning a lot about public health, and who knew we were going to end up in a pandemic less than a year in. So that was interesting. But I mean, one of the things that I do as part of that role is I'm on the scrutiny board for our local health services. So we get to ask questions about why they're running the way they are and things like that. And it's an interesting experience. I mean, I think, again, going back to what you were saying about maybe the benefits of not knowing the system too well. I remember the first scrutiny meeting I went to, and I really had no idea how this all worked. You know, it was my first ever meeting. I hadn't watched a meeting before, and I was brand new to this. So you sat down with an agenda and basically, you know, just went through it with a highlighter pen and, you know, what does this mean? Why are we doing that? What's the evidence behind this? And I just asked a list of questions. And I had people coming up to me after that meeting going, it's really nice to have some proper scrutiny.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
And I'm like, surely that's normal, you know, isn't that the point of this? And it's I think almost by sort of not having seen what was expected, or, you know, how other people approach it, I think it just sort of gave me that freedom to, you know, to look at things in a new light, if you like.
Yeah.
But yes, I think, I mean, I had an email back. One of the things that happened yesterday is because I'd raised a concern about something that had happened. Long story. I can't go into too many details because
that's fine. Yeah.
Confidential.
Yeah.
But I'd had an email back from somebody, and it was a very cross email.
That means you're doing something right.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm actually quite conflict avoidant. You might be surprised to hear.
Not really.
I don't do a very good job of avoiding conflict for somebody who's quite so conflict avoidant. But it makes me really anxious. And so I read this email, and my first thought was, oh God, have I done something wrong? You know, maybe I shouldn't have said this. And then, you know, I had to go away and sort of calm down and sit down and think about it for a little while. Actually, no. Actually, I'm completely right. That was the right email to send. And the fact that, you know, people are, it's getting that sort of response sometimes means that you asked the questions that needed to be asked.
100%.
And I think it's, again, one of the things that I've learned from mixed martial arts is being able to sit with those slightly uncomfortable feelings and, okay, that's just how I'm feeling. That's okay. It doesn't mean anything. And then sort of work through it and kind of go, you know what, that is the right thing to be doing.
Yeah.
And sort of separating how things feel from how things are.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that struck me from that is a scrutiny board sounds absolutely amazing. That sounds like my ideal job. To be on a panel of a scrutiny board sounds like a bag of fun. But
it's, I mean, this is one of the things that I actually love about being a local councillor, because it's being able to go to those meetings and to look through, you know, okay, these are the decisions that have been made, and to be able to pick them apart and say, why are you doing it like that? And like I say, it's, you know, who knew this was a thing? But it's one of those things that often doesn't get. These are the things that don't make the news. I think politics tends to focus on the grandstanding element.
Yeah.
I've actually started watching a lot more of the select committees from Parliament recently, and there you see a lot of the more interesting work. Actually, that's where a lot of things get done, is in those committees, and you see politicians in a very different light in those committees. But as I say, a lot of the time, that's not what makes the news, because it's not the dramatic.
Yeah, the popularization of politics is, you've got people standing over each other in the House of Commons or the House of Lords, and they're leaning over the table and they're screaming this and that and they're saying this and that. And there's also, I mean, what it reminds me of in a lot of ways is like a rap battle, right? They're essentially just saying the worst things they can get away with in a room where there's an adjudicator sat there. And it's almost like a courtroom in the same way, right? It's just people shouting at each other. And
there's a lot of posturing, and I suppose the local politics equivalent of that is full council, where you have there is a lot of that posturing, and it's not quite on the same level as the House of Commons, but it's but I think, as I say, what people don't necessarily focus on so much is that the real work gets done in committees, and that's where you get to go through these things with a fine-tooth comb and pick out why is this happening. And that's where you can get a lot of even in opposition you can get quite a bit of movement, because by bringing up those problems and by highlighting those and bringing that to people's attention, a lot of the time that's where you'll get movement on things, and people go away and actually take those points on board. So that for me is, I mean, again, it's how you measure success. It's going back to that key thing. And as an opposition politician, how I measure success is, are my points being picked up by the people sat across the room from me? And are they talking about the things that I want them to be talking about? So, I mean, health inequality is a big issue that I've been, I sort of made that one of my key things that I wanted to talk about a lot, because in our borough, people in one area die 12 years younger on average.
Jesus.
People in a different ward. And as I say, I mean, we see this effect across the country, but it's particularly pronounced in Solihull, because there's a lot of disparity between the very wealthy areas and the less wealthy areas. So that's one of the things that I've been talking about a lot. So for me, one of my measures of success is, well, how often are the council officers, how often are the cabinet members talking about this? Are they taking these things on board? Are they prioritising this? And when I see that, okay, well, we're putting together a strategy to address health inequalities, I don't know whether that was my influence that put that there. I've no idea. So I can't point to that and say I did that. But at the same time, I do know that my being in that room changed the nature of that conversation. And that maybe led to certain things being focused on that wouldn't otherwise.
This might be a bit of a fluffy question, because I'm not really sure how to frame it in the best way, but how do you combat the knowledge that obviously you have some topics that are extremely important to you, and how do you combat getting them into the vast sphere of topics that full council meetings have to contend with? And obviously there's resource allocation, there's budget allocation, there's only a certain amount of time, etc., etc., etc. Like, how do you do that?
So there are ways that we can raise things. I mean, there is a number of tools we can use. I mean, for example, we can ask questions at full council. So we can ask questions of the cabinet members and the chairs of those scrutiny committees, and we generally, as a group, we plan those quite carefully to make sure that the things that are important to us, but also the things that are important to the people who elect us, to our residents, that they're getting talked about. We can put motions So if we want to say, we think the council should do this like that, and we've got a specific suggestion for how that should work, we can put that. As I said, as an opposition party, we're unlikely to get those motions passed. They tend to get voted down on principle by the Conservatives who are in administration.
And that's the political system, right?
Yeah, but again, by putting that, so for example, with some of the climate motions that we put, we put it at one point and it got voted down. And they said, oh no, you know, these naive, unrealistic Greens and yada yada. And then a few months later, they brought back their own climate motion, which actually was something that we could support. And yeah, we looked at that and we thought, actually, this has got, you know, the key points that we want in there. But obviously, you know, there's that element of political posturing. But would they have done that if we hadn't put it to them a few months earlier? Who knows? Who knows? But again, by the fact that we were in that debate, you know, it changed the nature of the conversation. And because they knew that we were focusing on that, and we were asking questions about it, and we were putting them on the defensive, so they had to address that. So again, it's like with, go back to the mixed martial arts analogy, you know, if you know that somebody's got really good takedown defense, they may never have to use that takedown defense because it forces you to engage with them in a striking battle. Yep. But the fact that you know that they have it, the fact that you know that they have that weapon in their arsenal, means that you engage with them in a different way. And it's the same thing with politics. If you anticipate a certain response, it's going to change how you go into that conversation. So that's, you know, and again, as an opposition group, the fact that we're there means that they can't get away with certain things that they wouldn't be able to get away with otherwise. And I think this is one of the things that we've seen in politics over the last few years nationally, is that in some ways having a less effective opposition has meant that the Conservatives have been able to get away with things that they shouldn't have been able to get away with, that a more switched on opposition group should have been pulling them up on. And I think that's one of the, you know, there is an art to good opposition in politics, and it's something that you don't necessarily see the effect of that, but you definitely see the absence of it.
Yeah, and I think there's something that's so prevalent. I mean, there's a couple of things from what you've just said, and the first is that I don't think I do well. Like, I'm quite an argumentative person, a lot less now than I used to be, but I can imagine me sat in a room where you rightfully bring a motion that you believe in, right? And then it's voted down based on the principle that your colour and team is wrong. And then months later, essentially there's a plagiarized version slid across the desk and you're like, oh, that looks really familiar. And
we're green, so we like recycling, even when it comes to
That's an amazing answer. That is an amazing answer.
I mean, we have to, because we get our policies recycled all the time by by other parties. But actually, again, it's how you measure success.
Yeah,
you've got to look at how are we measuring this, and it's, you know, is it that we're getting the credit for putting things? Because if you're looking for credit, then politics is a difficult field to be in. If you're looking to make change, then actually it's amazing what you can accomplish if you're not worried about who gets to claim the credit.
I think for me, it's not about credit; it's about respect, right? Like you're sat at a table knowing that you're not respected in the same vein that your skills and your experience may warrant. And now that gets us into a whole other debate about the whole political system and careerist politicians and whatever. But
I mean, just to be clear, I think the political system needs all manner of change. You know, I think there's understanding the system as it is, because you have to work within it, but that should definitely not be taken as an endorsement, because I think there's all kinds of things that if we were starting from scratch, we wouldn't start from here.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the thing that you mentioned about, you know, I raised a motion about climate change, and then months later, months, what are we talking about? Months, Jesus. Like I worked for the Competition and Markets Authority for about 3 years, nothing to do with politics, obviously. But just understanding how the business worked and watching, you know, they take 6 months to audit a company. I'm like, 6 months, you've got all the data, like this is a joke. And now I work in private practice, and just seeing the rate of change is insanely different. And you would have thought, again, if you start from scratch, that it would be the other way around, really, or at least parallel, right?
I think with all of these things, it's a question of, I mean, like with mixed martial arts, you know, you have a certain rule set, and it's about how do you, what's your strategy for victory under this particular rule set that you face? And, you know, it might not be the best rule set. You might not agree with all the rules. You might think it would be better if, you know, it's like this. But at the end of the day, that's what we're dealing with. And it's a question of going away and saying, okay, using those rules and using that system and how it works, how can we get to what we want, to the outcome that we want? And I think it's very much a question of thinking of it strategically. The mistake is very easy to make in politics, like in mixed martial arts, and something that you see, actually, it's only inexperienced mixed martial artists who do it, but you do see it from politicians who ought to know better, is taking things personally. You know, somebody punches you in the face in a mixed martial arts fight, that's not personal. They don't care about you as a person. You know, they don't dislike you or whatever. They're trying to do what they can within the rules of that system in order to win a competition. You just happen to be there. And it's exactly the same in politics. It's none of this is personal. And you do see
for you.
I think, I mean, this is it. You know, I think there's a moment in the last full council meeting, we were looking at the local plan, which talks about the Conservatives. They have put a council plan for where they're going to build all the houses in our borough.
Right.
And they brought this to full council. I mean, it was a virtual full council meeting because we're not having anything in person at the moment.
Sure.
They didn't take it to any of the scrutiny boards, so we couldn't look at sort of the ins and outs of it. And they just brought it to full council in the hope that they're just going to be able to slide it through without anyone really noticing. So we sort of went, I mean, we were there till after midnight, from sort of 6 o'clock in the evening, and we scrutinised that plan, and we went through it, sort of, you know, the problems with it, and, you know, why are we doing it like this? And you can see that, I mean, the leader of the council, I've got a great clip where he gets really worked up. He's shouting about, oh, this is an inappropriate question to be asking. And it's like, you're taking this personally. It's not personal. I'm doing my job. Doing my job within the rules of this system. And, you know, I was tempted to make some joking remarks about men being too emotional for politics, but I decided that might not go down well. But yeah, and as I say, it's the same thing. You can't afford to take it personally, because as soon as you do that, you lose sight of what the strategy is.
Well, it becomes an ego battle, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it's like, well, actually, you know, the correct strategy has nothing to do with how I feel about it. You know, it's how do I get the outcome that I want? And that's true whether you're in a mixed martial arts fight and somebody's trying to punch you in the face, or whether you're in a political meeting and, you know, somebody's, again, you know, all of the posturing and everything, that's just part of the game. But the end result is, right, how do we get to where we want to get to?
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is a little bit of a controversial question, but do you feel like having an acceptance to the rules of the game is partially being a little bit institutionalized? And let me give an example why I say that. So, like, I wear a promoter's hat sometimes. I'm on the board of Pantheon Promotions, which is like a grappling show and whatever. And one of the things that we pride ourselves on is we have a rule set, right? Obviously, otherwise it'd be a bit of a strange event. And we listen to the fans, and we listen to the competitors, and we say, what can we do better? And we go away and we change rule sets, we tweak rule sets, we change essentially like legislation and litigation, which is, you know, just the rule sheets, right? Yeah. That doesn't seem to happen on the same scale. Now, of course, you're dealing with thousands of people in government, and you're dealing with an antiquated rule set and an antiquated system. Yeah.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right that having a view to, you know, not just this is what the rules say, but are these the right rules? That's important. And, you know, sometimes you can put forward changes and say, look, I think we should do it like this instead of like that. It's not always easy. We don't always get approval to do that. You know, but at the same time, you're absolutely right that you don't want to just sort of have a passive acceptance of, oh, well, that's the way it is. Better. So I think not losing sight of those changes that we need in the system. I think, you know, things like campaigns for proportional representation, for example, are a good example of that. It's like saying, well, actually, we know that we have to win under the current system at the moment, so we have to have a strategy that allows us to do that, but we should also be campaigning for changes to that system.
Yeah.
And sort of having sort of both sides of that. And again, sort of it's knowing about, you know, understanding what are hard and fast rules, what are conventions, what rules can maybe be stretched a little bit or a bit more flexible. And again, you know, there's also your own moral compass. It's like, well, how do we want to behave? You know, it might be that we can get away with this, but should we? And all of those things sort of feed into when you're talking strategy.
Yeah, it's for me anyway, it's a vastly interesting game, an exhausting game, no doubt, but
yes,
but a vastly interesting game and even that seems a bit gross, like calling it a game. Like there's literally people's lives on the line here.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, it's a very high stakes game, is what it is. I mean, like I say, mixed martial arts is reasonably high stakes because you can very easily end up in hospital if things go badly. Politics obviously is that on a much bigger scale. You know, it's you have not just one person's health and well-being, but that of whole communities and the whole country, you know, riding on some of those decisions that are taken. So yeah, and I mean, so I'm saying it's a game isn't to minimise the consequences.
Yeah, sure.
It's understanding that you have to navigate it within certain rules, and I think as much as, you know, we'd like things to work differently, I think it's understand the reality of the system that you're within, because that's how you can get the best outcomes within that system.
Do you think though that the system itself is kind of, I mean, it feels to me like the system and the entities that surround the system are different, because the system essentially is up for interpretation. Like it feels, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like you approach the system in a very utilitarian view, and you're doing things not for the success or for the want of yourself, but more, as you spoke earlier, about wanting to help others, wanting to give back to others, wanting to do better for others. Whereas it feels like the same system with the same rule set is being approached in an entirely different ideology by a different set of people. And that to me feels like, and I don't mean to labor this point about the system being up for interpretation and wanting to be different, but as you've rightly said, it's very different. It's very difficult to play a game that you've agreed on a rule set, but people believe the rule set mean different things, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, different people, again, it goes back to what I was saying about bending the rules.
Yeah.
And different people sort of feel it's acceptable to bend the rules in different ways. And again, I mean, there is that dilemma. You know, it's like, well, if they're doing it but we don't because we don't think it's the right thing to do, does that then put us at a disadvantage, which means that we're less likely to get the chance to implement the things which will make a big difference for people? And that's really hard.
It's dirty.
There are no easy answers to that. You know, it's you know, if there's a sense in which the system itself is broken because it incentivizes bad behavior in many ways.
Foul play. Yeah.
And again, you know, that's where it becomes really important to be sort of calling that out and saying, actually, we need to change this. And at the same time, recognize that, okay, we're working within this. How can we, you know, what can we do in order to counteract that? That is within, you know, what we believe is acceptable. And I mean, that might mean sort of calling it out in the media. It might mean, and sort of, you have to start thinking quite creatively about how can we get this message across? How can we get this message out there? And, you know, how can we do that within what we believe is an acceptable way to do business? So yeah, so it becomes, I mean, that's, for me, again, what a lot of political strategy is about. It's about how do you navigate those things? And there aren't any easy answers. You know, it's all very well saying the world should be like this, or, you know, we should do, or it's like, how do we get there from here?
Yep.
What's the path to doing that? And that's where things get really hard. And like I say, sometimes it's, we like to think in terms of good guys and bad guys.
This is a point I wanted to ask you about. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about.
There's that sort of thing. And I mean, I really think it's more complicated than that, because I mean, the more, certainly when I meet local politicians, most of them are there because they want to do the right thing for their community. They're not in it for the money, because
there isn't any.
It's certainly not enough to make it, you know, for that to be, it's not a job you would ever do just for the money.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, you know, whatever colour they're wearing, they're there because they want to do the right thing for their community. We disagree about what the right thing looks like.
Yes.
However, at different levels of politics, I mean, again, you know, when you're looking at sort of the national level, things change. And I think to some extent, you know, the system that we've got, it selects for people who you don't really want to have in politics. You know, I think I think it was Douglas Adams who said, you know, something about anyone who wants to be president should on no account be allowed to do the job.
Yep.
And I think certainly anyone who is too keen to be a politician under the current system, you'd have worries about actually doing it.
Yep.
So what you do about that, and again, I think, you know, the best answer comes down to, well, you change the system. But I think given where we are, you can see how a lot of the problems arise from the setup that we have. And that goes beyond, you know, which particular person happens to be prime minister or which particular group of people happen to be in control at any one time. The system is problematic because the people who tend to get elected are not always the people that you want to have elected. And especially when you compare us with some of the other countries around the world, some of them do a better job of getting people in those leadership positions who are maybe appear to be a better fit for the role.
Sure.
And as I say, it's not that we don't have those people. You know, it's not that we don't have our Jacinda Ardern's in the UK. It's that those people are not getting elected under the system we currently have. We have lots of very competent people who I'm sure would make an excellent job of it. Where are they when you look at our political system at the moment? And I think that's the
I mean, I think the point that you raise is really, really, really important. And it's that nothing is ever as linear as people are allowed or led to believe that it is. There's no, I mean, in some cases, I am sure there are some people in politics that just aren't good people, right? And I'm sure there are some people in politics that are great people. But that extrapolates out to absolutely everything. And the thing that must be remembered is that these are just people. And that, I think, is something that, especially at a grassroots level, just isn't understood enough, is that people deem, like we've talked about the system, right? Quote unquote, the system. And if I said to you, what is the system? Well, we're going to say it's a determination of rules set out to enact a number of actions, right? Cool. But it's very hard to actually define what that is. Without spending another 6 hours, 7 hours, 9 hours on this podcast. Now, the thing that we must also understand is that the people that are the mechanics of this system, that tinker with the system and use the system, are just humans. And at the root of it, all of those humans, I would argue, probably have some form of family that they want to go home to at the end of the day and enjoy in some fashion. And like you've just said, and so eloquently put, is it's like everyone's there at a relatively grassroots level because they want to enact good change. It's just a determination of what is good and right that is disagreed upon. And that just, I mean, that's beautiful. But it also turns to your point of, you can't take it personally, because everyone's determination of what right is and good is different. And it's a fleshing out and a hashing out of what the utilitarian view of that is. So you and your oppositions will have a discussion and hopefully come to a determination that suits as many parties as possible about what is right.
And I think it's that's exactly it. It's sort of differentiating between people's intent and the effect of people's actions. So I think I'm forever saying good intentions are not enough. Lots of people might have good intentions. You know, I'm sure plenty of people in all political parties have good intentions. The question is, what are the outcomes? What are the results that we're seeing? How do we, you know, and if the results are bad, then it doesn't really matter that you had good intentions. I think nobody cares. So,
of course.
For me, it's not a debate over who is morally right, or you know, who's the better person. You know, and this is what I see a lot of politics debates turn into. You know, on media, it's, you know, whether people are good people, and it's, for me, it's not about that. It's about what are the outcomes that we're getting here, you know, and how do we improve those outcomes?
I think it's because, and again, I'm going to say this and then allow me to explain, like, politics doesn't matter to the masses. And what I mean by that is in your local council meetings or in the larger meetings that people don't get to see because they're not put into the media, that's where the real work is done, but nobody knows that. So what politics is to people and what it's grown to be, and this is so well played out and well illustrated by the US election, is it's a popularity contest. That's what it is. And if people determine you to be a good person, frankly, they don't care about what your policies mean because they believe you to be a good person. And that's where your point comes so brilliantly. It's about if let's take our Prime Minister at the moment. If people believe he has good intentions, he's 75% of the way there, right? So 75% of his time is going to be spent on determining that he's a good person, right? Whether he is or not.
I mean, an awful lot of time. I had a really interesting experience when I first started campaigning, and when I agreed to stand as a target candidate, and we were out doing door knocking and getting to speak to people. And when you start to understand how people look at politics and how they make decisions and about who they vote for, it's like that. It's not the way that I think many of us imagine. You know, I think exactly as you say, people don't weigh up different sets of policies and say, well, what's going to be best for me? A lot of it comes down to, do I like the look of them? You know, and I think, with the Prime Minister in particular, there's this big, oh, he looks like somebody I could go for a pint with.
Does he?
Well, this is something that seems to come back from, I mean, not me personally, but a lot of people say, oh, he's the kind of guy you could have a laugh with. And again, I mean, for me, I don't want my Prime Minister to be somebody I could go for a pint with. I want them to be actually, that's not my criteria. That's not somebody I'm. But I think there is that sense of, is this somebody I can relate to? And that's, I think, one of the reasons, it's very difficult to make, when that decision then has an unseen impact on all manner of other things. Mm-hmm. But it comes down to, a lot of campaigning comes down to a marketing competition.
Yep.
It's can we market this person as being more capable, more likable, more approachable than the other guy,
or even the opposite way, right?
Yeah.
Like if we look at Cambridge Analytica and we look at now we're getting into my kind of field, right? Where it's the marketing, and obviously all the marketing is done. I say all, obviously, primarily. The largest source of marketing at the moment is social media and digital marketing, right? Because there's only so many hours in the day that you can knock on people's door, right? If you knock on someone's door at 11:30 at night, the likelihood is they're not going to answer, or if they do answer, they're not going to be best pleased to talk about politics, right? So when we look at the way that marketing is done, a lot of it isn't even to big up yourself; it's to make the other person a deplorable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is one of the reasons that sort of first past the post systems tend to lead towards very polarized politics, because a lot of it it's not about what's good about us, it's what's bad about the other guy, because we know that you've only got two real options. So if we make them look bad, then
we look good.
And I think, I mean, this is one of the reasons why a change in the voting system would actually have a change, make change in the way that politics is conducted, and it would change that for the better. So that's something that I think is really important. But again, it's a question of how do we get there from here, which is a much harder question.
What would you like to see in an ideal world? If you could have an overarching iron fist of change, what would you like to see?
I mean, I think what I've often said is the one big change that I would like to make is to replace our voting system with a system of some form of proportional representation. And we can argue over which exact system is the best one. To be honest, I'm not that fussy. I think anything other than the one we currently have would be an improvement. But I mean, if you look at the way that MPs are elected, I mean, there's countries all around the world who have proportional systems that work much better than ours. And I mean, if you look at the elections for example, the Scottish Parliament, they have a proportional system. And actually, if you look, the Scottish Greens are doing very well because they have that proportional system. But again, it's not about which particular group benefits, it's the change in the nature of the dialogue and how we think about and talk about politics. So yeah, I think that would be my one big change. If I was suddenly Prime Minister and I had free reign to change one policy, I think that would be it. Yeah,
because I mean, one, that would be amazing. Rosi Sexton Prime Minister. Let's do it. Let's sign you up. Let's do it. But I mean, the other side is that I'm not even sure, because when we get into party politics and like cabinet politics and whatever, again, it just feels like a fight, right? That's what it feels like. It feels like a battle. It feels like, I mean, the best illustration in recent years, I think, is the the archangel triangle between Gove, Boris, and Theresa May, right? Where they were all just setting each other up and who was going to fall first. And unfortunately, it turned that Theresa was the one that pulled the last straw, and Boris managed to worm his way in. But it's like, it's as if even in your own party, the people that you should be spending all of your energy and time to say, okay, we're all on the same page here, let's try and make some positive change. Half of that is cloak and dagger inter-party politics that is determining that you keep your power seat and that you determine who your friends are. And like, I can't remember what the show was, but it was a Kevin Spacey thing, and he was supposed to be the president. And there was a really, really good dramatization of how inter-party politics works and how the power struggle works and the power dynamics work. And I can only imagine that is just as exhausting as sitting in a council meeting and trying to determine the minutiae of the rightness of some form of health proposal, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I said, you know, trying to figure out how to get there from here is, I mean, there's a lot of what it comes down to. And like you say, I mean, it's exhausting, because a lot of the time you look at it and you go, you know, obviously we should do it like this. You know, that obviously there's a better system, but you have to get there.
Yep.
And that's where things become hard.
Yeah.
Politics is hard. And the reality is there are no perfect systems. You know, every system has its problems.
Of course.
Any group of people, they're going to have agreements and disagreements. You know, I think even within any party, there are issues that people within that party will disagree on. I mean, we have lots of those in the Green Party. I mean, and you know, other larger parties are even more so. So again, it's sort of getting the balance between, well, trying to get that messaging sort of, well, how do we make sure that we're all on the same page here, when people might passionately believe quite different things, and then combining that with, you know, how you interact with other parties as well. So I mean, it's hugely difficult and it's hugely complicated, and there are definitely no easy answers. So I wish I had. Look, we just need to do this and everything will be fine. You know.
Yeah. I mean,
I wish there was something like that.
Well, that's as linear as a good person versus a bad person, right?
And I mean, I think this is the appeal of conspiracy theories. Sometimes it's because
Sure.
It makes it easy. It's, you know, the idea of, well, there is this shady group of bad people who are, you know, controlling everything, and if we just get rid of those, everything will be fine. I mean, it might not make it easier to make any change, but at least in terms of how you think about it, it's like, it's very us and them. You know, it's easy to conceptualize. But actually, the reality is a lot more complicated and messy. And sometimes you can have a situation where everyone wants one particular outcome, but nobody can figure out how to get there.
Yeah. Because
of the way that the system is set up, and, you know, things. So, yeah, it's both what makes it interesting, but also what makes it intensely frustrating.
Yeah, and I mean, to go on the conspiracy theory thing, there's probably 2 points to make. The first one is, the other reason why conspiracy theories are so inviting is that sometimes there's some legitimacy to it, right? Sometimes there are some people that are conspiring to do certain things for their own wealth, right? And that we've seen be publicized, right? So when people are like, oh, well, if that one's right, then there's a potential, you're telling me there's a chance, right? And the other side about, especially why it's so easy to be as divisive for us and them, is that's really how humans are built. People are built to look.
We're team players.
Yeah, we're built to look after the tribe, and outside of the tribe is an alien. And, you know, like, I'm not shocked that Trump uses that word. I'm not shocked that entire campaigns are built around that word, because it's something that strikes fear into the very innate core of what it is to be human, right? Now, that alien may be a snake that's slithering into your camp and is going to eat your children, but it's, you know, it's the same across everything. And I feel that's one of the parts of politics that's incredibly dirty and underhand, is the playing and the understanding of how to manipulate human nature in order to determine somebody being in the seat to make the power, to be in the seat to make the rules, or have a larger effect on what the rules are than the next person.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, humans are tribal by nature, and I think we see a lot of that coming out.
Oh God, yeah.
And again, what you do about that, I don't know. There are no easy answers. I think it's something that we have over time progressively broadened who we can think of as our tribe. You know, I think we've gone from it being, you know, the small group of people who we interact with regularly, to, you know, thinking of our community or our country, or, you know, I think even sort of thinking of, well, even sort of thinking of the whole human race as, you know, these are our people. But I think it's very easy to start to use that messaging to build those us and them narratives, and it's very easy to slip into. You know, again, it's sort of the political terminology, and, you know, party politics lends itself to us and themness. So it's and again, you know, how you get that messaging across, and how you encourage people to sort of to bridge across those divides while working within that system. It's very hard.
Yeah, completely hard, because even and again, talking outside of the system, you have a population of people that are conditioned to expect the system to work a certain way, even though they may egregiously disagree with it. They're conditioned to expect a certain thing, and if somebody comes in with a different thing, as we know, humans don't like to change themselves a lot. So change is often met with a barrage of negativity, even if the change is good, right? Even if it's more than good intentions. And that's something that's entirely difficult to think about. I want to offer something about a change and see what you think about it. Like, what do you think about the introduction of tech into making decisions at a political level? So there's a lot of discussion about, as you know, we've sort of circled around the similar point a few times about how, you know, ego and emotion come into these conversations in a political sphere, and how the posturing and everything else is such a large part of politics. If you could remove that entirely and replace it with an algorithm.
So I think there are challenges with that. And part of the problem is that when you introduce tech and when you introduce algorithms, you're not removing human influence, you're just making it one step further removed. And what we've seen is that when you have biased humans, you tend to end up with biased algorithms. Because of the nature that's, I mean, and we've seen that, you know, with facial recognition, for example. There's some evidence that the algorithms you end up with are systematically biased against certain groups. So that's a real problem. And when we're talking about artificial intelligence decision making, there are some real difficulties here. I mean, I've been reading a lot around this at the moment, because I think it's something that will become increasingly a problem. It's something I'm dealing with in the health sphere at the moment, because there's an increasing use of things like artificial intelligence symptom checkers in order to triage patients. And that's becoming, that's creeping its way into the mainstream at the moment, as we speak. And the problem with that is there are certain systematic biases. And you've got to look at things like, how is this going to work for people who are maybe a bit less articulate? How is it going to work for people who are less able to use tech, who are less able to explain their symptoms, who don't necessarily know what you mean by some of this terminology? You know, are certain groups more likely to engage with it than others? You know, are you going to create more problems? And also, when those problems come up, how can people get those addressed? You know, what's the system for somebody being able to escalate that? Because I mean, if you've got somebody who can't get through to the doctor because the artificial system has told them that they don't need an appointment, what checks and balances are in place to make sure that that person can escalate that? And we're starting to see real problems with this. You know, when systems become more and more automated, and that human element, the scope for human judgment becomes narrower, it means that when those systems make a mistake, people find themselves sort of caught in that horrible loop of, you know, well, I don't know how, you know, I don't know who can deal with this, and I can't get through to talk to a real person who can look at it. And when I do speak to somebody, they tell me that, oh, I can't do this because the system is telling me that. And you end up with that horrible sort of bureaucracy by tech. So it's really important to look at how we're doing it. And I'm absolutely not saying that all technology is bad or all use of algorithms is bad, because we're going to have to look at how we can do that better. And there are certain areas in which it can provide a really useful assistance in that decision-making process. But we need to look at how we're doing it. And that's an important political question. And it's important that politicians understand the implications. And I think a lot of the time they don't. And my experience of talking to politicians about some of these issues is that there is a real lack of understanding of some of those implications. And I've been, like I say, lots of times in meetings, I've raised some of these points. I think actually we had Babylon Health in for a scrutiny meeting in Solihull. I think because I pushed specifically for that, because they're rolling out their service in Solihull and Birmingham, and that's still on video if anyone's interested in watching it, on the Solihull Council website. I think it's back from February this year, and it's really interesting. But a lot of the time you're asking these questions, I said that actually some of the political implications are embedded in those really technical questions about how this works. So you've got people who understand the technology who aren't necessarily politicians and who aren't accountable to the public, and then you've got politicians who don't necessarily understand the technology. And I have real worries about how these things are going to interact.
So I have a vast overarching theory of how all of this stuff is going to end up. And a lot of it, I think, is going to come down to that tech just moves faster. And I think that whilst tech is evolving, there are people like yourself who are on one side trying to arbiter the political implications of that, but the people in the same room as you don't understand the tech in order to get to the minutiae of political decision, as you've just said. And yet, in the time that it would take somebody to get into that technical understanding, the tech has already evolved 2-3-fold, right?
Yeah.
And I think that because of some of the things that we've already mentioned, resource and budget and the system and how long it takes to do things, I think that tech is just going to just keep expanding and expanding and expanding at an exponential rate. Before we know it, we're going to be in a position where it doesn't matter.
There's a really interesting book that I'm just reading at the moment. It's called Future Politics. Okay. And the author's name escapes me at the moment, which is bad. But it's definitely worth a read, and it talks about a lot of these issues that we're going to face with increasing use of technology and how that's going to affect our politics in the future. So I thoroughly recommend
Jamie Susskind?
Yes, that's the one.
Thank you, Google. Cheers.
But yeah, no, I mean, it's a really interesting read, and I think it gives an overview of some of the challenges that we're going to face. And I mean, it's one of the reasons that it's a really interesting time to be in politics, but also a terrifying time to be in politics. And I just don't know how all of this is going to play out. And I'm really worried about some of the possibilities, as well as excited about others.
Well, I want to offer, this is me asking a selfish question of an academic now, but I have a theory, bearing in mind I work in tech. I have a theory that within maybe not our lifetime, but maybe just after that, the understanding of what it is to be human will be vastly different to what we determine it to be right now. And I think that, I mean, my hyperbolic grandiose statement is I believe that humans are consciously or unconsciously developing the next evolution of ourselves, and that evolution is tin-based, it's metal-based, it's AI-based, it's some form of technological understanding, technological conscience, some form of organism. I'm not sure on the branding or the wording of it, but I feel like we are delving more and more into uploading ourselves. Even this conversation, right? Take this conversation, regardless of the fact that we're in the midst of a pandemic and whatever else. You know, we're having this conversation via tech, right?
Yeah.
And it probably would have been a lot more difficult, one, for me to lug all this kit up to Solihull or to put you on a train to come to London, right? The ease that tech offers and the addictive properties that tech offers are growing at a rate and operating at a rate that 98% of the population just don't understand.
Yeah.
And yet we are pouring 98% of our time into that tech. What do you think about that?
I suppose something, you know, one of the takeaway points from all of this is that I think we need more people who understand tech.
Yes.
Who also understand politics.
Yes.
More people who understand politics who also understand tech.
Yeah.
We need more crossovers there, and that's going to be really important. And as I say, you know, I think people tend to very easily fall into one of two camps. And it's that sort of binary thinking, is that, you know, either tech is good and it's going to save the world, or tech is awful and we should be against it. And the reality is obviously more complicated than that. You know, I think it's looking at, you know, what are the benefits, what are the dangers. Obviously, you know, there are elements of that progress which are going to be really good and really valuable. What do we need to guard against, and taking that more nuanced view. And I found that really difficult when I'm making this point because again, it's a really live issue in healthcare at the moment. And I found this really difficult making this point. It's like, I'm not against change. You know, I think the idea of GPs moving to more remote appointments, for example, and being able to contact people by telephone, by video appointments, that for some people, that's a really positive thing. You know, I've spoken to people who say, well, I don't have to lug my 3 small children to the doctors with me. And this is good for everyone. Yep. But at the same time, that it's creating sort of access issues, and there are some appointments that aren't as effective remotely. You know, there are some things that you have to be in a room with people to know. And how are we making sure that we're not missing certain things, and how are we making sure that the right people are getting, you know, that face-to-face contact? And what are we doing about people who struggle with remote contact, you know, whether for sensory, you know, if they've got sensory impairments, or if they've got, you know, just you know, particular, I mean, for example, I've spoken to some autistic people who really struggle with telephone and video conversations. So what are we doing for those people who it doesn't work for? You know, and it's that balance of, yes, this is good, but we've got to look at how it's being implemented, and we've got to look at, the nuance around that. And getting that across to people seems to be really hard, because again, there's that urge to fall into that binary of either, this is great and we should encourage it, or this is bad and we should oppose it.
Yeah, and I mean that speaks quite kindly towards Elon Musk's points about, obviously he's a tech genius, an engineering genius, and yet he is extremely vocally calling for a lot more stringent regulation of open source AI, open source coding, and just a slowing and an understanding of the reactionary.
I mean, I think at the moment we're seeing a lot of power being transferred to big technology companies.
Oh, I mean, I think it's been transferred. I don't think it's being transferred. I think it's done.
Fair enough. And a lot of that is, they're not accountable. I mean, they're accountable to their shareholders. They're not accountable to the public. And that's a problem. Because when you've got companies that are accountable to shareholders and not the public, who are wielding what is effectively political power, what implications does that have for your political system? And yeah, I mean, that's another whole can of worms.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna put some, it's all actually spawned from a conversation I had with my friend, where I sort of fleshed out this idea that I think that we're descending into a non-human future, and he opposed that vehemently. And I said, I'm going to write some words down, and I'm going to write some words down about what I think is the future. And I think what you've just said is brilliant about, if you're accountable to your shareholders only, then, what incentive do you have? Well, you have an incentive to make money. And how do you make money? Well, you evolve the tech, you sell the tech, you popularize the tech, and then you popularize it some more. And then, that's what you're left with. And this kind of reminds me of, I've forgotten The Big Short. Have you ever seen the film The Big Short?
I haven't.
Okay, so essentially it's based on true events, where there was a guy that, all around the Wall Street crash in America, 2008 Wall Street crash, I think. And he was the maths genius behind the investments for some hedge fund, right? And there was $300 million that he was playing with, and he invested it all into mortgages, essentially, like really bad mortgages. And then Wall Street crashed, and then he sold them back to the bank for something like $1 billion, right? Something unbelievable, some unbelievable amount. And the parallel there is, it's like, if you can see the future of governance, right? If you can see the opportunity, then you're going to take it. And I think that the people that you're discussing and the people that we're discussing, the transfer of political power unconsciously, essentially, right, has already happened. And we're living in an age whereby the decisions that are being made for us are probably being based on monetary gain rather than humanitarian understanding. And as you've rightly pointed out, it's a vast problem. Yeah.
And like I said, I think the sort of lack of understanding around what's happening and why, and again, it sort of comes back to, well, who's controlling the media?
Ooh, that's a question.
And what is it that makes it into the public consciousness? And I mean, you start to sort of see, when you start unpicking how all of these things are connected, and you can't separate the system of government and the political system from our financial systems and financial institutions, or from how the media operate and all of those things, because they all interrelate so closely. And when you look at, you trace it back and you look at, well, where's the power in this, and why are things the way they are, and whose interests are they operating in, you start to realize that actually you know, when we talk about a democracy, what do we actually mean by that? You know, where does the power lie in a democracy these days? And yeah, as I say, what you do about any of that, I don't know. But I think it starts with, I think, trying to understand how those transfers of power are happening, and to unpick, you know, what the mechanisms are to bring some measure of accountability to that system.
Yeah, and I think your points are entirely correct. Though I think the problem is I think it's too late. That's my gut feeling of you know, even in my own space, like I don't do anything fancy with tech. I'm just an engineer, but seeing the changes in the last 7 years is night and day. And even for me, somebody that's employed to be of an understanding, even I'm not able to carry the whole weight. I'm not able to understand everything. It would just be too much time. I wouldn't actually be able to get anything done. I'd just be reading day upon day upon day upon day. And then you think about somebody like yourself or somebody else in politics, you actually have a job to do, or for you personally, you have like 6 jobs to do. And then on the back of that, you're expected to do all of this extracurricular reading and all of this extracurricular understanding. And I think this is something, one point I will make about how we should be a little bit more sympathetic to the people that are governing the system is that if we, like, just from this conversation that's coming up for, you know, just under 2 hours, it's like, you have been through a variety of phases in your life. You've been a variety of different people, and you've been able to apply yourself to a variety of different spheres. In that is inextricable complexity, countless decisions, countless interactions, countless experiences. That means that your life on a whole is very complex. And if you look at mine, for instance, I may not have been in as many spheres or lived as many lives, but there are probably a similar amount of interactions and experiences in varying different formats. And that means that my life is, in some degree, just as complex as yours, right? And then if we think about, okay, now let's extrapolate that out to every MP or government official. Everyone's life is inextricably complex, and it's so difficult to determine that. And when you then say, well, you should know more, it's like, okay, let's,
it's very hard. I mean, I do, or I have started to realize a lot more the challenges of the job, actually.
Sure.
So, I mean, being an MP is incredibly, I mean, doing it well. I will fully admit that not all of them do it well.
Of course.
Doing it well is an incredibly hard job. And you know, all of the things that you have to stay on top of in order to have an understanding of what's going on, both in your constituency, but also sort of more widely. And, you know, all of those things. It's tough. It's tough. I get that. And I think a lot of people, I mean, everyone hates politicians. Everyone loves to hate. And I think that applies, you know, whether you're a councillor or anyone else. You know, there are a lot of people who will just assume, oh, you're a politician. You're all in it for yourselves. And I hear these things on the doorstep all the time. And I can understand where people are coming from. I think if more people had had more experience within the system, even in a small way, you start to see where those challenges are. And one of the reasons things are as they are is because it's not as easy as that. Sometimes you change it. So I think, again, on the one hand, you know, I think I completely agree that a lot of politicians are not as good as they should be. And again, some of that comes down to how we select them. You know, I think our recruitment process needs an overhaul. But at the same time, you know, it's a tough job. And, you know, when somebody's sort of emailing you to talk about their particular hobby horse and expecting you to know all about it, and it's like, I don't know. It's not something I've thought about, you know, because I've got several thousand other residents with their own particular issues that they want me to think about. And I'm only a local councillor. So you multiply that by, 17 or whatever it is to get, the scale of a parliamentary constituency, and you can see, how people struggle to keep up with it all. But I think, again, part of it is that, the population as a whole, we outsource our decision making because we can't follow everything all of the time. It's impossible to have a good understanding of, all of the issues and what's going on around leaving the EU and the coronavirus response and what's happening in schools and what's happening, the issues around children with special educational needs and how they're being affected by the current crisis, and safeguarding for vulnerable children and adults, and visiting in care homes. And that's just looking at the, a few of the things that are going on at the moment, in sort of the areas that I'm familiar with in the council sort of portfolio. So looking at over the country as a whole, there's a massive amount to take in and to think about. And I think, on the one hand, the population, I think we would make much better decisions if more people had more in-depth understanding of that. But at the same time, how can you maintain that? And as you say, have a job and do other things, and you've got your own world to think about, and people are sort of thinking about how they're going to keep a roof over their heads and put food on their table, and the pressing issues they've got in their day-to-day life. They're not going to engage with all of those things. So I think it's difficult.
It's almost an impossible job, right? I mean, it is, in my opinion, it is impossible. It is impossible for you to have so many facets to your time in 24 hours, right?
Yeah. And the world is becoming more complicated.
Yes.
As you say, with the introduction of technology alone makes just the number of issues that raises, and all of those things. But also the number of different sectors across the society and how they all interact and all those things. So yeah, it's a massive job, and I wish I had some easy answers here. I don't think I do, but
I think that's good though.
Yes. Yeah. And
I think it's good that you wouldn't try to give easy answers either.
Yeah. And I suppose, if I had any sort of closing or takeaway messages, it would be that we need a lot more people, good people from all different walks of life, involved in politics.
Yeah.
And again, sort of seeing politics as a really valuable profession, and understanding what politics is about. It's not about the shouting that you see on the television. There is so much more to it. We've touched on some of that today, but I think it's really important that we get a wider selection, a wider representation of people from so many different areas, people who understand technology, people who understand healthcare, people who understand education, people from all of those backgrounds, in order to feed into what's happening. So I never expected to get involved in politics. I sort of ended up here. It was definitely a case of mission creep. Kind of like my MMA career as well. That was mission creep. That's
a great story, by the way. The story of how you got into MMA is a great story.
As I say, I was going to have a couple of fights just to prove to myself I could do it, but then it sort of turned into a 12-year.
And then you ended up with the UFC, fighting Ioanni and Jacek along the way.
Yeah, and it's sort of one of those things, you just do take the next step in front of you, and before you know it, you go, oh God, how did I end up here?
Yeah.
And politics, my political journey has been very much the same. I think it's kind of how I operate. You just do the thing in front of you, and then you suddenly realise that, oh God. But having got here, I would definitely like to see more people from all of those different backgrounds, because we need them. And going back to what I was saying about I've got a different set of experiences from most career politicians, that's really important. But I think everyone has their own individual set of experiences, and we need lots more of those, you know, and fewer people who went to Eton and then did PPE at Oxbridge.
Sure. I have one final question for you, and that is, I hope it won't drag on too long, but my question is, how do you balance everything that you have in your outward life, i.e. being a politician and combat sports clinic and all this stuff, to being a mom and a partner and just Rosie? Like, how do you balance that?
Badly, most of the time.
Okay.
It's chaos, and I just try to make it slightly more controlled chaos. I think the best analogy that I've seen is it's like juggling, only you've got way too many balls and you can't possibly juggle them all, and you're going to drop some. But some of the balls are made of plastic and some of them are made of glass, and you've got to try and make sure that you drop the plastic ones and not the glass ones. And that is in a nutshell. Whereas, you know, trying to make sure you catch the important stuff, and then some of it can wait, and you'll come back to it and pick it up.
I think that's beautiful.
So that's, but it always feels like you're. I think the key thing to be aware of is that it feels like you're failing at everything all of the time.
Sure.
It feels like you're continually dropping things, and it's only when you look back at what you've managed to achieve, you know, when I look at my filing cabinet, or you look at your, you know, you managed to make something happen in politics, or you solve one of your residents' issues, you know, as they got discretionary housing benefit payment sorted out for somebody the other day, and you look at those things and you go, yeah, it's worth it.
Yeah.
But you only see that when you look back. Like I said, at the time, it's all you notice is the things that you're not managing to do, and you know, it's that you're dropping balls left, right, and centre, and occasionally one smashes, and you try not to make that happen too often. But yeah, it's I think to some extent that's the nature of modern life. Is we're all doing that.
Well,
I mean,
to some degree.
I mean, I think I know that I have a way of picking up too many balls and trying to. I think, you know, on my gravestone, I have my catchphrase is, maybe I should have started with something easier.
That's brilliant.
Because that's just how I am, you know. I'll dive in at the deep end and then go, oh shit. But we muddle through, and it's muddling through that I think that's where the work gets done. Indeed.
Well, look, tell people where they can find you if for some reason they've been living under a rock for the past 15 years and don't know who you are.
So I am on various forms of social media. I'm Rosi Sexton on Facebook. I'm at Rosi Sexton, ROSI SEXTON on Twitter. I'm also at Dr. Sexton Green on Twitter. That's my political incarnation. I'm probably a bit more active on there. As I say, I try and keep the politics separate from some of the other hats I wear.
Sure.
Both because I think my residents would be a bit confused about the posting about combat sports and injuries, and also because I think the MMA audience may not always want to see my political views. So that's my social media. You can email me at Rosi Sexton, that's ROSISEXTON @gmail.com. And you can find me at combatsportsclinic.net or altonosteopathy.com.
Or at combat_clinic on Twitter.
Yes, that's one of my other Twitter accounts.
Yes. Yes. Well, look, I mean, This has been phenomenal. So from me personally, from all of your constituents, and generally just from everyone, thank you very, very much for the work that you do. Thank you for having this conversation. It's been a pleasure to speak to you.
I've really enjoyed it. Thanks, Harry, and
No problems at all.
catch up again. All the best.
Absolutely. Thank you.